Community and District Development Committee meeting today. It's the 14th of February, it's Valentine's Day, so let's share some love around the room. And also just share a thought for those people for last year at the cyclone over in Hawke's Bay, and for those families that are missing a few loved ones. So welcome everyone, welcome Mayor Tapsell online, and welcome to those people that the media, those that are listening on live stream, and to our staff, and we do have a member of the public sitting in the back, so morning welcome to you. Just a reminder, the meeting is being live streamed, and so if you could please ensure that your phones are turned off. We'll aim to take a break at around about 11 o'clock this morning. Just a reminder, councillors, that we do have quite a busy day today. We do have a council meeting starting this afternoon at 1 o'clock, so we do need to have a little break in the middle of the day between meetings, so let's hope we can get through the business of this morning reasonably quickly. Councillor Barker, could I ask you to open the meeting with a karakia, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tu tawa mai runga, tu tawa mai raro, tu tawa mai roto, tu tawa mai waho. Ki tau ai te mauritu, te Māori ora, ki te katoa, haumie, hue, tāra ki e.
Kia ora, Councillor Barker, for that. I have apologies from Councillor Patterson and from Councillor Waru for lateness. Are there any other apologies? No, everyone else is here. Councillor.
Just got to say that Councillor Waru was meeting with us lakeside and
yes, I have got. Yes, I've got that. Thank you. So are you happy to move that, Councillor Maxwell?
yes.
Thank you. Seconder, thank you, Councillor Barker. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against?
Sorry, I've got one more to. Sorry,
Apology.
I've got one more to add, just an apology for lateness from Councillor Patterson if he's not there already.
Yes, I've noted that. Thank you, Your Worship.
Oh, thank you. Sorry.
All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Thank you. That is carried. Are there any declarations of interest this morning? No, there don't appear to be any. Are there any urgent items that are not on the agenda? Appear to be any. Thank you. Moving now to the confirmation of the minutes, page at number 5.1 of your agenda. Can I have a mover and a seconder that the minutes of the Community and District Development Committee meeting held on the 12th of December 23 be confirmed as a true and correct record? Moved Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor Barker. No matters for correction. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Thank you. That is carried. We were going to have a hearing for the revocation of the 10 Barnard Road Reserve. The submissions closed on Friday the 11th of February. There will be a full catalogue of submissions that will be made available for councillors for the next meeting when that matter will be determined. Given that there are no submitters that wish to be heard, there is no necessity for us to have a hearing today, so we can move on to the next item. So moving on now, this is the final piece of the puzzle in terms of our housing for everyone, decision on plan change 9. This, as I've mentioned before when we were discussing the Housing for Growth paper, is the final piece that needed to ensure that we have our 30 years planning all in place. So I'm signalling that I'm happy to move the recommendation once we get to that part of the agenda. But at this stage, could I ask for a mover and a seconder to receive the report, decision on plan change 9, Housing for Everyone, be received? Moved Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor Maxwell. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Thank you. Carried. Morena, John Paul and Jason, welcome, and you'll overview the presentation.
Morning and good morning everyone. Thank you for the opportunity just to take you through Plan Change 9. We've got the final recommendations back from the independent commissioners who took part in or led that hearing process. We've got a presentation which, because this has been such a long process, we thought it was important just to make sure we covered off what the key elements of Plan Change 9 were, and obviously the process that we've gone through to get to this point today. I'm also just keen to acknowledge the team that's been involved in this. It's the same team that also ran the parallel piece of work around the FDS, so a significant amount of work for Damon, Kim, Simon and Anna, with the support of the rest of the wider planning team as well. So I really want to acknowledge the significant amount of work they've put into it. And as you discussed last time when we presented the FDS, the huge amount of community engagement that was required through that process as well, fronting up to a huge number of groups to answer questions and provide that information about what is often a bit of a dark art in the planning space. So yeah, really important work they undertook there. So I've sort of covered off what we've got here. So just as part of that, what was that process? What's the overview of what were the changes were, and where have we got to at this point for the recommendations before you? So if you remember, Plan Change 9 is part of our requirements under the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, so the intensification plan change requirements to make sure we have sufficient capacity within our city boundaries. So for us, we couched that as housing for everyone. So again, it was enabling housing to be developed, but also starting to address some of the challenges we had about those typologies that we were missing. You've heard us talk in the past about the missing middle, so homes that not only the single home on a single section, which is the traditional Res 1 sort of zone, but also picking up on some of those other housing types, the duplexes, the terraces, the apartment style homes that we are really missing as a more affordable or a more accessible choice or housing choice for people. So that did require us to change our planning rules quite considerably across a number of zones. And equally it picks up on the fact that part of the contribution to our housing crisis were our district plan rules being seen as a barrier, very prescriptive compared with a lot of the other districts who have experienced growth or significant growth in the last few years. So if we just go back to that, so really also making sure that as we bought into these changes, it was making sure that it was very much a design-led focus. So really looking hard at how these rules actually ensure we get good urban outcomes in the housing delivery. And obviously design guides are an important part of that, or a recommendation that we have that in place. But equally sort of sitting behind that and giving that flexibility at the same time trying to guide was making it easier for different lot sizes as well as those housing types within the plan. So PC9 also pulled into the operative district plan the performance standards that had currently sat outside with the medium density residential standards. So the MDRS that was operative since August 2022, PC9 brings those into the operative district plan and really starts addressing some of the challenges of, well, what if those conditions aren't being met? So that was an important set of changes and acknowledgements within the district plan that we brought in. So if you remember, medium density enables a building envelope of standards that allows up to 3 homes, 3 stories permitted on a site across all of the city, as long as they meet that range of performance standards. It also just clarifies too where resource consents are required. So if it goes up to a comprehensive development or 4+ units, or on smaller sites where some of those standards aren't being met, that's when consent conditions kick in. So really the purpose there is to make sure we're being as enabling as possible. So reduce notification requirements, etc. High density, obviously this was quite a significant challenge, was the conversion of our old medium density zone to a high density zone, so we're in the peripheral of the city. So really that walkable catchment for future intensification around the city. So a really important change there. A lot of discussion during PC9's community engagement about how far and how big that zone should be, and we'll come to that again a bit later on. Probably the most contentious of the issues outside MDRS within this discussion. Commercial zones, also making sure that within the commercial zones of the inner city, the peripheral commercial zones in Fenton Street, also making sure we're enabling homes within those areas. So being really clear about our unit sizes, but also making it a permitted activity within those commercial zones as well. So again, encouraging housing choices within those commercial parts of the city as well. So a real walkable city, or providing some different focus for the CBD as well. And probably the most significant iwi issue that was raised early on and really had come into the discussion was enabling papakainga. So quite an extensive set of changes around rules for papakainga. If you remember, one of the biggest frustrations in the definitions was the fact that the rules specifically around papakainga had to be adjacent to marae. So that's where that part kicked in, and anywhere else it was just a residential house being built or a residential development. So a really important part of responding to that early engagement we had with iwi was around that enabling framework for papakainga. Natural hazards, and I think it's with the anniversary of Gabriel and the reference to it at the start of the meeting, just really important too for us to understand the significant importance in understanding where we are with natural hazards, particularly flooding for our city. You know, that's obviously led us to a whole bunch of modelling work, the IIF applications to improve our stormwater, but also some clarifications around, therefore, where consents are needed within risk zones. So really important additional check that we've brought into the process. Now from that as well, and we start looking ahead to the next plan changes, flooding and hazards is going to have to be an additional plan change as we drill deeper into some of those key rules that we need within the district plan. But equally, one of the things that have come back from the implementation of the MDRS, or those medium density residential standards, is a decrease in the impervious surfaces. So actually we had quite high levels of impervious surface permitted within our existing district plan. So the MDRS actually brings that down in some circumstances. So really important for that. And also the other part which had come through quite strongly was again discussions around gas and venting and our hot ground. So our geothermal issues being recognised within the plan as well. And finally, and it sort of sits there just on itself, is we talked about the time when we introduced development contributions. So whilst we were increasing charges for growth to fund infrastructure, also a recognition that the one size fits all of our financial contributions, which is the contribution people make for reserves, should have been more variable and more bespoke to the different types of homes. So we've had a reasonably large change in the financial contributions away from the 5%, so down to 3.5% or lower, depending on what the housing type is. So that is a sort of a concession in costs there, recognising we do have a significant amount of reserve space across the city.
Morning all. Thanks JP. I'll just take you through the actual plan change process that was followed right from the March 2022. As JP alluded to, there's been a lot of engagement pre-notification and post-notification that sort of underpinned the whole philosophy of the process was engagement. At the start, there was engagement, workshops, open days with mana whenua, community groups, schools, developers, consultants, neighbouring councils, regional council, government departments, agencies. So on that, I've just got a bit of a two-slide sort of flow chart here, which I'll just lead through. The first one there is the March 22 is when it was actually included for medium density residential standards in the Amendment Act, and that kicked off the preparation of the plan change. Now through that period, March to August, there was extensive consultation, workshops, as I alluded to, open days, hui, to test, to refine and go through what the issues are and what would be the response to those issues. That moved in then into the actual notified on 20th of August 2022. And again, information sessions. So through that period, there were information sessions to inform the public what those changes were, so that people were informed when making submissions. Of note, the submission period was doubled. The Act requires 20 working days. It was actually doubled for 40 to try to have more information sessions and actually provide people with longer period of time. Of note as well, through that period, in excess of 20,000 letters were actually sent out to ratepayers, iwi, stakeholders, again advising of the notification period and a brief summary of what that actually means for that particular area that was receiving that letter. We received 99 submissions through that period, and upon receipt of those, council officers and various experts summarised, assessed, and then notified the summary of submissions, which then resulted in 173 further submissions through that period. And again, then there was conferencing. Once we received all those submissions, there was consultation with submitters on key issues through that period, December through to June, and the outcome of that then was what's called the Section 42A. So that's the actual officers' reports to the hearing committee and to submitters how they're responding to or proposing to respond to submissions. The submitter evidence was then received, so everything is pre-circulated. And again, the philosophy of engagement and no surprises at a hearing. So the submitter evidence was circulated 4th of August, and that was in response to the council officers, what I referred to as the 42A report, and that was around the August 23 date, and again, more engagement through that period. There was then opportunity for legal submissions on any legal issues, and that was tabled on the 20th of August, again all pre-hearing, so that was all pre-circulated. Leading up to the hearing, there was more conferencing between council officers, experts, submitters, which results in amended council officers' advice to the hearing panel, again taking on board submissions on how are we responding to those. The actual hearing took place 14th of August to 22nd of August 2023, where the panel heard from those that wished to be heard on that.
Jason, just to pause there for a second, because I think it's really important when we had those 99 submissions, there were some quite significant comments made in those submissions, and I'll pick one particular, which was the submission received from Kāinga Ora, who had asked for us to consider extending our high density zone, which we'd sort of placed it roughly across the current medium density zone. Their suggestion was, if you're taking a truly longer term perspective, you should consider extending that right out through Glenholm. So again, when we summarised submissions, there was a number of issues that came up which could have quite profound impact on what we'd notified. So the further submissions opportunity was a chance for us to get some letters out there and get that information out to people to say, you may not have submitted because you liked what you saw, but actually when the submitters actually put in these submissions, they've asked for some quite significant changes. So that was one of the issues. Kāinga Ora's one around Glenholm. There was also the submissions we received around Papakāinga, which have an impact in the rural sector particularly. And there was also further more detailed submissions and quite big changes around from Waka Kotahi and I'm trying to think of the railway companies, Kiwi Rail, around those corridors. So we had to summarise those, and that was actually why there were so many letters sent out in that summary of submission, was to highlight to people who are in those areas what those submissions had raised, and really giving people the chance to say, hey, I might have liked the first bit, might have accepted it, but actually there's been some suggested changes which do have a significant impact, and do you want to make further submissions? So hence the further 173 we received, which were predominantly about the high density into Glenholm. So that was where those further submissions were received. So I just thought it was worth pointing that out, because it was a really important step that the team did to go as widely as possible and make sure that awareness was there of those submissions.
Thanks, JP. And I think that's an important point, that keep that in your head when we go through the actual recommendations from the commissioners on that. As JP said, the majority of those 173 further submissions were as a result of sending out letters saying, hey, you may not have been aware on that. So the hearing, as I said, 14th of August, just over a week, where there was, submitters, council officers, experts, all having the opportunity to talk to the commissioners, raise their points for the commissioners' consideration. An important point just after the hearing was the adoption of the future development strategy through this council and regional council. So that's where that came in just after that. So the commissioners were aware of that at the time of their deliberations. So the independent hearing panel recommendations, which is what's in front of you today, was then brought to council in February 2024, and the plan change and legislation has a date of 30th of March 24 as the deadline for the operative decision date. So just a high-level summary of submissions, which is probably in your reading pack as well, of more detail. Medium-density residential standards, in particular heights, which then went on with privacy, sunlight, character. So a number of submissions on those actual standards. There is post-pandemic perspective, as we call it, on is this just a response to the COVID-19 sort of lockdowns? Is this a long-term trend? What's happening in that? Papakoinga, as JP said, much more enabling, removing that adjacent to a marae and also increasing the density standards for Papakoinga. We didn't actually receive many submissions on that. Residential 2 zone, extent of the high density, why that's bold is that was mainly those further submissions. Again, that got a fair few submissions on, okay, well, the extent of the high density zone. Fenton Street was a theme around character, entranceway, buffer to Glenholm, all of those matters on there. Infrastructure and natural hazards was raised around, actually, if you're increasing density, increasing what are you doing with natural hazards, and that's where JP was talking about the flooding, additional rules plus a future natural hazards plan change. And then access standards, if you're having more dwellings off a right-of-way or shared access way, what should that look like? How should we deal with that? And some submission points have also informed the future development strategy. So just to recap on the independent hearing panel, very experienced panel, with David, Rob, Stephen, with local context, and David and Rob also, while living out of town, have been involved in various plan changes for our council before with Pukehangi. Rob was on the Nongataha flood review panel and various other consents and plan changes, so they know the context. Quite a detailed slide, so I'll try to provide a summary on this. I thought it was important to put up the notified plan change was then, as I alluded to before, assessed in relation to submissions received. The council officers and experts assessed those and then made further recommendations to the hearing panel as a response to those submissions received. And by and large, the Commissioner's recommendation adopts the changes promoted. And I'll just run through those fairly quickly. The first one, residential vacant lot subdivision. Now this got submissions and various different experts' opinions on that. Where we've landed to the commissioners, in which they've accepted, is more of a nuanced approach to minimum lot size, and that's increasing the minimum lot size from which was notified for large parent lots. So that's if the parent lot is over 1,400 square metres. So that is if your lot to start with is greater than 1,400, but decreased for small parent lots. So if you don't have a great deal of land to start with, amending that to have smaller lot size that you can create to encourage more affordable, smaller dwellings, and with a shape factor. So there's still some design criteria there, but trying to provide for increased typologies. With the existing district plan having relatively, now in today's speak, larger lot sizes, we're seeing larger houses, less affordable, those types of things. So that's what that's trying to address. We got submission from Ryman and retirement villages, and one of the changes here is actually making it more enabling for retirement villages. Part of their submissions were actually how is that different to medium density residential, and I'll come back to that because some was in scope, some was out of scope off this actual plan change, but where it was within scope, the commissioners have aligned that more with the medium density standards and made it more enabling of a less restrictive activity status and with some more enabling standards. In regards to hazards, geothermal hazards, there's a fair bit of discussion and evidence on actually how do we deal with geothermal within our geothermal field, especially within higher density. So where that's landed is replaced. The proposed notified was that structures or houses would have to have venting structures, and now where the commissioners have got to is that you submit an assessment of geothermal hazards with the building consent. So again, it doesn't trigger a resource consent, provided that at time of building consent you are submitting that you've taken into account geothermal hazards. On that, we're also most of the way through developing a practice note, so that can actually be used by the industry to say, okay, well, this is how you design within the geothermal area. The outdoor living space for residential and city centre, removal of outdoor living space requirements for residential development. Again, there was expert evidence submissions on that of how far should performance standards dictate that, or should that be up to the designer, urban design, to incorporate that into the design of buildings. So a little bit more flexibility. Papakainga, as talked about before, that's had further refinement of the amended rule framework and definitions around actually Papakainga. So that's a lot more enabling, removal of the adjacent to marae, and also, as said before, the density of how many Papakainga can be established. Development on sites adjacent to heritage structures. So the recommendation is that there's a matter of discretion regarding heritage values included in the commercial and residential zones for development. And that's where, if that triggers resource consent and you're adjoining a heritage feature, structure, then that needs to take into consideration on that. Is it sympathetic to? How does that sort of take that into account? The marae protection area, which is existing in the district plan, which is the immediately adjacent to marae, is what's called a protection overlay to stop sort of the grandstanding if you're having larger, taller buildings looking into the marae. And again, I'll come back to this on a couple more slides, but that was around the extension of the marae protection overlay around Rotorua marae, which is opposite the Boys High school on that grounds. So again, I will come back to Rotorua marae in a minute. So those were the changes that the officers were recommending that the commissioners accepted. Then, in addition, the commissioners, having weighed up all the evidence, their balanced approach, listening, and through their actual recommendations, you'll see that they use the word sort of pragmatic and looking at it from a practical sense. Their recommendation is deletion of the residential 2, so the higher density zoning on 5 blocks west of Old Taupo Road. So that's opposite Boys High, where it was proposed to jump the road into higher density on the other side of the road. And I've got a map in a minute that will highlight where that is, as well as Matatua Marae, Rotorua Boys High School, and the block on Rotorua Road reversion to residential 1 zoning. So what was proposed was, from an urban form, forgetting existing land use, would that be suited to higher density? Now, the notified version was like, yes, it would. The commissioners have listened. It was causing some concern, and they were like, no, let's pull back, because actually, in reality, there's other constraints that it's probably not going to be developed to that high density. The next one down there, additional commercial development controls adjacent to certain sites. Again, submissions from Seventh-day Adventist School and the church on Tilsley Street. Now, that's next to an existing emergency housing provider. So David Hill was one of the commissioners on the contracted emergency housing, so he had heard a lot of the issues previously, and these issues were live here. So what's happened there is that there's additional controls reducing the height if you're building next to that sensitive school that has no other place to go, just to provide them a bit more protection from redevelopment, any use on that. The same also for Lakeview Villas at 285 Vaughan Road, which is adjoining the Tenai shopping centre. They had concerns about proposed heights within that, so there's additional controls, reduction of height in relation to boundary in relation to that site. So again, commissioners heard those submissions and have provided relief sought for those submitters. Residential units in the city centre on ground floor, it was proposed in the plan to be more enabling on that. There are a number of submissions on that saying, do you really want that as a permitted activity? As in, you can't put design controls, you can't have influence around good design. So the recommendation from the commissioners is restriction on residential activity at the ground floor in those city centre zones. And why it's a restriction is it's not straight to building consent. There is a pathway for resource consent to essentially check in. Is it appropriate? Are you having active frontage? Are you having all those good urban design outcomes? So this map here, and I can spend a bit of time on it, is the high density, and there's two. There's this map and then another one, which is actually where the commissioners have recommended. So the pink is the high density as notified. The differentiation is the yellow. That's actually in the existing district plan at the moment. So the medium density / high density goes further south in the operative district plan, and also into Fenton Park, which is just on the bottom right down there, is just north of Margarita Street, going further south. Off note here, you'll see those 5 blocks that I mentioned to the west of Old Taupo Road in the middle. Again, jumping Old Taupo Road to, part of the rationale there was to try to provide more density around West End and getting more people living in that. Boys High, again, you'll see there just to the north. On that was proposed of an underlying zoning. Again, noting zoning is only one part. That's not saying that Boys High will be. It was just, hey, if this was an urban form discussion on city centre, where would the best place for higher density be? And again, on the Matatua Marae or Medical Officers Reserve to the north of that, the proposal was high density, as same with that little piece adjoining Rotorua Road on that. So again, painting a picture there, just again keep in mind those west of Old Taupo, Boys High, Matatua and Rotorua Road, which then the recommendation from the commissioners is, if you want a high functioning central city as our main commercial area, actually refine the high density some more. So they've deleted or recommended deleting the high density on Old Taupo Road, those 5 blocks. Boys High, Matatua Marae and Tarira Road area. So they've pulled back on those and said, look, from a pragmatic sense, you're not going to get development on Boys High, that Medical Officers Reserve. And they weren't convinced of jumping over Old Taupo Road would actually increase density that would have an impact on the CBD because of the busyness of that road, the barrier that that puts in.
And maybe this is a good point just to reference the future development strategy. So if you recall, the future development strategy goes, okay, well that's what we need now, and with a 30-year view, there may need to be additional parts of Glenholm, which brings in another high density zone, as well as or a consideration of what might happen on the racecourse in the future. So again, that gave us a chance to say, actually, that we're keeping that higher density around the CBD. That's what we need currently. And then in the future, there could be a consideration of it being extended if necessary. So that was that sort of tie back to the future development strategy as well.
And just on that, keeping in mind the future development strategy is a strategy, so it's not actually rezoning. That is a future-looking 30-year, and then there's a check-in, which this process is more that check-in to say, hey, for the immediate or 10-year horizon, what is the appropriate response to that? The panel had to turn their mind and make decisions on in-scope and out-of-scope. And there's various case law that they had to refer back to of actually what is natural justice, what was reasonably anticipated as part of what was notified. So how many changes can you actually make without? So there were requests, as there always is through district plan. People try to, it can be an easy way to get rezoning. So there were submissions from Department of Corrections around making community correction facilities more enabling. Education facilities and community housing. So those three were considered at length by the panel and determined that they were out of scope because they were never actually in all the assessments, the pre-work, engagement, that those were truly new issues. There was a submission from Somerset Holdings for 171 Ferry Springs Road, which is also part of a fast-track consenting process that has been accepted. And again, the same logic was rezoning of non-residential land into residential was out of scope for the same reasons as the previous ones. So again, fast-track that will consider, is it appropriate for a consent, separate process, but it wasn't appropriate to rezone at this stage. There was submissions around financial contributions for infrastructure. Again, as JP mentioned before, we have had changes to financial contributions for reserve contributions, but it didn't go as far as infrastructure, so again, out of scope for that. And the majority of requests by the Retirement Village Association and Ryman Healthcare relating to retirement villages were out of scope. Where they could be in scope was around those residential standards, which is where the commissioners have made the recommendation to say, hey, where we can and they're in scope, make it more enabling. But that probably needs more work and any future plan changes around that.
So, councillors, you've got these as the recommendations that we've put forward in the report. Obviously, there is also the need to reference the attachments, which was the decision-making report by those independent commissioners. As we do often, we've just got our own catch-all recommendation number 3 there, that the acting or interim CE be given the delegation, just to make sure that there's if there's any editorial changes or minor changes that need to be picked up, we're still enabled to do that without coming back to the committee. And then probably the last piece there, which is if the recommendations go through today as proposed, they become operative once we've publicly notified. So the intention at this stage is there's some check-ins on those final, have we got all of there's no errors, no problems with what's been cited. So I think the team is looking at at potentially notifying next weekend, so next Saturday. Is the aim at this stage. But again, it's just for us doing that final review with the consenting team and final checks of any wording changes through that. So that's kind of the recommendations as they currently stand. Again, and maybe just as Jason and I will just tag team this, obviously PC9 has been driven by that need to provide intensification options within our urban footprint. So that's what we've done, and you see from the discussion we've focused very much on making sure that it stays in scope of what that intensification opportunities are. For us, it was also very much about saying, hey, we've had a restrictive plan. We need to be more enabling and take away some of those costs for households or developers to develop or change. And again, it's a time and cost. So time is the other challenge. We've reported about some of our challenges in processing consents within the statutory timeframes, and that is volume and complexity. So removing some of those issues is really important for certainty for developers and for mum and dad investors if they're looking at a second unit or anything themselves. So enabling and reducing costs, so really important, and also providing those opportunities for some different types of homes. So we've got quite limited opportunities for the single house on a single section here, quite large sections and quite restrictive in that footprint. This was also intended to start giving us some options for some other typologies, as well as making those subsidiary dwellings on a site much easier as well. And picking up on some real challenges that have existed within our district plan. And you can see there, Papakainga, management of floods, risks, financial cost contributions, another cost question, design, again, really critical. Activation within the CBD has been on that ground level, big issue for the commissioners when they responded to those submissions. Also making sure we've got our design guides and our view of making sure what does good look like. So that's really helped us with these changes. And then streamlining provisions where we can, really important. The other bit for us, and it's only for us, is we're meeting our statutory requirements and our timelines. So the huge amount of work the team has done has been very carefully programmed to ensure we've got as much engagement, as much response, and much understanding as we've moved through the step, with the view that we had that 31st of March deadline to complete this work. So again, I'd repeat, the team has done an amazing job, very systematic, the great overlap with the future development strategy to make sure that the two parts of this puzzle talk to each other, and we're not leaving people confused that am I submitting to this or am I submitting to that? We've brought all of that information together and used it effectively across the two. And the final point there is we've now gone into a change space. We've got a new coalition government. We've got discussions about a changed future and expectations around how we support housing. I put that paper to you at the end of January for your consideration, which really starts looking at some of those things that might change. So at that time, I highlighted the opportunity for us to say, hey, we need to be enabling. We need to have the capacity. And actually, at that point, we may be in a really good position to start saying, actually, we want the choice and some flexibility to change some of the standards that have come through from the MDRS. So again, that sort of time frame, this brings it into our plan. If we do then our housing and business assessment this year, and we understand whether we've got sufficient capacity, the 30-year focus, we would be then in a very good position for you to make a decision about whether you want to opt out of the MDRS as a package and give you back the flexibility to make some of those changes. You'll recall that earlier slide, one of the big issues that is still out there in the community is concern about height. So that would give us the chance to say, is that appropriate? If we've opted out and we've still got sufficient capacity, do we modify that as part of some future changes? But again, that's a program decision and a capacity decision for you in the future. So we think we're retaining all your optionality moving forward, whilst addressing some of the critical issues we had around housing supply, typologies, and enabling frameworks. So that's the sort of caveats we've got at this point. That's us.
Thank you very much, JP and Jason, for taking us through all those steps. That's a really thorough presentation. So, councillors, any questions?
Excuse me, Madam Chair. Could I just seek clarification from you? So, after our report, we have a recommendation to accept, but also on the following pages it talks about alternative options. So, how will you address that? Is it if the majority don't accept the recommendation, then we look at the options, or how are we going to address that?
JP, do you want to talk to that? And given that perhaps you could highlight in the paper the risks around not accepting the proposed option?
Yes, we've tried to do that through the paper. Again, one of the challenges that we've attempted to do is if you've got two pieces, of rejection of the entire Plan Change 9, at least that one's fairly clear, but it has a set of implications that, again, it's that referral through to the Minister. If you try to then say, I don't like certain aspects of it, that's where we get into a whole bunch of complex issues, and at that point, we think we would have to go back to our commissioners to unravel the planning implications of that. So Jason might be able to elaborate further on that.
So just, to elaborate on that, there is currently no authority to actually withdraw in the legislation. So the option is accepting those recommendations, but if there are things that you're turning your mind to, there is the ability for an alternative. But I would also put some caution around that, is it has to be within the ambit of what the submissions were, what was in front of the commissioners in terms of that evidence and from a natural justice. So again, it has to be within the bounds of what has been heard, what the submissions were, what was notified, and then as JP says, it would probably go back to the commissioners for reconsideration on that, but they've been very careful around scope, legislative requirements, what they can and can't. So again, they've turned their mind to the submissions and coming with a recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor O'Brien, does that answer your question there? So I've already signalled that I intend to move the recommendation that's in the papers.
Thank you. I appreciate the answer, but no, I don't think it really does cover from my point of view, because as I say, there are options put down there. So if you're just saying, well, it's a yes or no to the recommendations, fine, I understand that. I've just given you an opportunity to make it clear for people.
Yeah, that would be the normal process, Councillor O'Brien, is for us to put the motion on the table. We would then have some debate around that and vote on that, and if the motion failed, then obviously we would look at what the options are. If it's passed, then there's no need to consider options. And I think, JP, I don't know if you want to clarify further, you did mention that there is the opportunity later on to modify parts of plan change that there may be some discomfort in the community about, and why we can't do it at this stage, but there is that opportunity to do it at a later stage.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, and I think that's why it was important to separate the two sets of discussions. So obviously we looked at what the National Party's housing policy was, that going for growth previously. At the moment, the focus is entirely on the 100-day plan of the coalition government, so we're unclear what that might mean in a coalition environment. But I suppose what I've tried to highlight is there is opportunities for us to, using the tools we have, which is the housing and business assessment, to assess our own capacity. And if that option is put on the table of exiting, we would have the provisions in the district plan that we could then modify if you so chose to. Again, considering those other factors like making it easy to obtain a consent and not reducing our overall capacity or limiting different housing typologies. So that is an option in the future. And again, because we don't have that absolute clarity from that legislative process or government's direction, that option is there for the future.
Thank you, JP. Councillors, are there any further questions? Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and again, apologies for my tardiness. Just have a couple of questions, just carrying on from what we've just been talking about. On page 17, it says, delay the decision, whole or in part. Council could potentially explore issuing a partial decision to aspects of the plan change. Can you just explain how that would work if we decided to say yes to this and no to that?
I think that goes to we don't know what you've got in your mind if you were to do a partial. The partial could be a minor or it could be substantive. Either way, we would assume that unless it's easily bound in a set of decisions, that we would probably have to go back to our commissioners and seek some guidance from them and their interpretation of what that meant against the natural justice requirements of what we notified, and seek further information from them. So I can't give you a definitive answer because I don't know what that change might be. If I took something incredibly minor or insignificant and just said it's only a CBD question about ground floor residential, then it might be a reasonably simple set of conversations or not. I'm not entirely sure. Again, I haven't got that detail of those submissions or what was said by the commissioner. So the scope stuff is very important for them to give that context to us. So I can't give you a definitive answer, but if you were to try and isolate some pieces, there is sure to be overlaps and complexity that would mean we'd have to refer it back to our commissioners.
Yeah, just one point I'd add on that is just reminding you that the actual medium density residential standards had immediate legal effect as of August on that notification date. So those standards are actually applying now. It's then that the plan change also includes all of those other, the Papakāinga financial contributions that aren't operative until a decision is made. So there's two sort of separate things, but as JP says, depending on what those issues are, some might be able to be untangled, but if they're intertwined, that's where the difficulty comes with trying to make some and not others.
Thank you. Subsequent question. So just carrying on from that then, you talk about further down that page about potentially opting out after the housing and business capacity assessment is done towards, I recall you saying at our last meeting, towards the end of this year. So for anyone who happens to be unfortunate enough to live next to somebody who gets their MDRS building approved and they go ahead and start building and they lose their height between now and that period, it's tough bickies for them, isn't it?
That's correct. It's operative, and
Yeah.
it has been since August 2022. And,
Right.
and I suppose the million-dollar question, well, wrong statement, the future legislative change question is we haven't seen a program to say that the opt-out of the MDRS or conditions around when that might be available or what that might look like. None of that's been developed. So there's only a signal of saying, hey, we want to give communities more choice. Probably what I tried to highlight from the paper in January was you've got to read the other parts of their policy to pick up on the caveats, which is, are you being enabling and have you got sufficient housing capacity? So that's why I've sort of suggested for us the most appropriate way forward is wait for them to come up with their policy. But actually the key for us is to make sure that we've taken the first step to say, do we have the capacity that we could have a valid conversation about opting out, if it's available.
Just a couple more, just clarification. Could you define what the word the words heritage values means, please?
So I'm just seeking clarification.
Thank you.
Perhaps, Councillor Patterson, do you have another question?
Yes, I do. And how difficult and lengthy is it, the process to rezone land from non-residential to residential?
I glibly say to you, 2 to 5 years and $1 million plus.
2 to 5 years. Okay, thank you.
Without using, so at the moment this has been done under the IPI, and I just can't remember what IPI stands for, but it's the fast track process. So normally,
planning instrument.
yeah. So there's the piece here with the intensification plan change that normally with a plan change you would have the opportunity for people to appeal, which then stops certain provisions going operative, and you would be off to the Environment Court. So that's when I sort of say 2 to 5 is kind of the general view, because you might end up with saying, okay, we've done all the work, got a notified plan, gone through hearings, got a decision, and it's operative. If there's appeals then to the Environment Court, then you add a significant amount of time while those are worked through.
Right, and does that apply to council land?
to zone council land, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Jason, you've got an answer around the
Yes.
heritage.
Yeah, so in terms of those heritage structures, there's actually a schedule in the district plan that currently lists all of the scheduled heritage sites. So that's what it's referring to as there's a list of heritage sites, and on particular sites, if there's adjoining development, then having particular regard to those.
So it's, sorry, just to be clear, it's a building or a piece of land that is defined as having heritage value.
Yes, the actual schedule refers to buildings and structures.
Right, so not land.
Yeah, not land, no.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kirioka, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. I have 4 questions, if that's right. Please, through the chair.
Can you just bring your microphone a little bit closer so we can hear you?
Sure. I have 4 questions. Thank you, through the chair. Thank you for your presentation. Number 1, I hope I'm correct in understanding that Mātātua Marae will be rejoicing once they understand the news that the area around Mātātua Marae and across the road will not be opened up to 6-storey apartment buildings.
Correct, Councillor. We've actually met with the trustees as well since the recommendations have been on our website to explain that, and yes.
Fantastic. My question, the extension of the marae protection overlay around Mātātua Marae to 40 metres, what does that actually mean in practice?
Yeah, again, that's in practice, there is no development proposed. So the practical sense is it's a reserve. If in the future there ever was development, then there are controls around height, restrictions within that overlay. So again, you're not dominating development over the marae. So that's moved further into that reserve for any future protection. But from a day-to-day, it's not adding any imposition on the marae.
Thank you. And my second question, that extension of the marae protection overlay, does it extend only to Mātātua Marae? Does it protect marae such as Parete Huata, which is also known as Tonohupu Marae, from office buildings being built above the village on Lake Road?
So the marae protection overlay, excuse me, does exist already. There was a submission from Mātātua Marae based on the high density, so that's why that one got particular attention based on the submission. So there is existing marae protection overlays around all marae. This instance was the trustees were saying, hey, this doesn't go far enough. Is there an opportunity to extend that further for that? So that's why the recommendation was just around this marae.
Okay. A supplementary question, please. Are other marae able to somehow extend that protection overlay from 5 metres to 40 metres around their marae?
Not at this stage through this process, no.
All right. Thank you. My third question, who was involved in the Papakainga working group, and were they responsible for redefining Papakainga to mean development of a communal nature on ancestral land owned by Māori?
I think probably we don't have the physical names here of who was involved in those different workshops. I'm looking across at the team. We can certainly circulate that to you, but I'm sorry, I don't think we have that on hand.
Thank you. And the second part of that question, was that group specifically, did they redefine Papakainga to mean what it's been defined at within this document?
Yeah, they certainly guided in terms of the notified version, and then through the actual hearing process, there was further consultation, further workshops, further engagement on that, and then there were further refinements based on all those discussions.
Okay, thank you. And my fourth question, of the 18 submissions plus the 7 further submissions received in response to the PC9 Papakainga provisions, how many were submissions made by actual marae o Runanga, not Kainga Ora, the government department or post-settlement governance entities, but actual marae o Runanga on behalf of Hapu and Iwi?
I don't have that information in front of me, but it should have been listed on the website for submitters. So we can probably it would be on the website because we would have received those submissions and in the summary of submissions. So we can probably identify those and quickly send that out to you. But it is actually on our website in that summary of submissions.
Yeah, what Simon was just saying was very, very few in actual marae. It was more individuals in regards to the submissions.
Thank you. Sorry, may I have one more question, please? The final question. The protected customary rights, and within the document you say that no protected customary rights were identified to Council and we heard no submissions to the contrary. I know that, my question is, the right of hapu to live within their existing papakainga areas such as Te Koutu, Whakarewarewa, Ngāpuna, Maurea, those existing papakainga communities, the right of hapu to live within those papakainga without urbanisation further breaking down their communities, is that not a protected customary right that was raised within this process?
So in regards to those three villages, those were...
Not the three villages. I'm not talking about the three villages. I'm talking about the papakainga areas such as Rotorua Road, such as Rotorua Road, such as Sala Street, such as Maurea.
I think the answer is no. They aren't defined. So you're self-defining those areas, and there might be community definition of those areas, but there is not within our current planning framework or in any of this, in any rule changes to create. We have our villages that are identified. Nothing outside of those footprints physically is identified as a papakainga area, and maybe I'll just refer to Gina on that. So no, there's nothing in there.
Just to clarify, protected customary right is a specific defined term in the legislation, and it refers specifically to marine rights. So under the legislation, if you have a protected customary right, you don't need a resource consent, but there wouldn't be any that apply in this district.
Okay, and may I have a supplementary question, please? Is there anything in the draft document policy and the recommendations made that require developers to take into consideration the cultural well-being of those existing papakainga within Rotorua that I'm talking about, the Rotorua roads, the Rotorua roads, the Sala streets? Is there anything that within it at all that requires developers to take into account the cultural well-being of those papakainga communities?
In terms of the actual district plan, did you want it? Sorry. In terms of the actual district plan hierarchy on that, there's no additional performance standards, but when you get into a resource consent that needs some form of discretion, then your higher level planning documents such as the Resource Management Act, Part 2 matters, Section 6, 7, 8, all come into play. So that is where the planner then would start assessing the context of that particular site, whether or not you need engagement, consultation, cultural impact assessments, all of that. That's where that plays out through that process.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, JP, Jason. I'd like to acknowledge the huge amount of work that your teams have done, and high quality work at that. I do have some questions, and they are in part informed by a couple of planners who take a more sceptical view of PC9. So let's get rolling. So this process is the end product, is it not, of a process that began in this chamber on the 12th of November 2021, when the SPNF committee decided to approach central government and ask if this Tier 2 council could be treated as a Tier 1 council to which MDRS applies.
I think, Councillor, with you seeking a yes or no on that one, the answer is no. It started with the 2016 introduction of the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, and then the modification of the National Policy Statement in 2020. That set out a series of requirements on Tier 1, Tier 2 and Tier 3 councils, and so that was the start of the processes for Plan Change 9.
Right, but the PC9 is a direct response to Rotorua Council being included with MDRS. It's an MDRS.
No, that's not
plan
correct.
change.
That's not correct. So MDRS was a separate piece of legislation put forward to circumvent a bunch of planning provisions for councils. It was independent of the requirements under the MPSUD, so we would have had a Plan Change 9, whether we had agreed or not agreed to be part of the MDRS, because we were required to undertake an intensification plan change.
Right, okay, so PC9 by character is built on the notion that MDRS is here in Rotorua and available to be used.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
So it gives effect to a separate decision. It does not circumvent the requirement that we had to do an intensification plan change anyway.
Yes, yes. So moving on to more substantive issues rather than process, the recommendation is that we reduce the minimum size of a lot to 200 square metres. What's the current square meterage at present?
The current is minimum 350, average 450 within that.
So 200 square metres is pretty tiny by comparison to what's currently around in Rotorua.
It is smaller, yes.
Yes, and I think the commissioners originally said 250 and staff recommendation down to 200.
Yeah, there was a fair few discussions, workshops, backwards and forwards on that. Yes, there is.
Mm-hmm. So this would amount to a change of the provincial character of Rotorua, we could say, with this kind of housing?
It should, over time, by enabling more housing within residential zones.
Okay, my next question is really for Stavros, if he's available to answer this question, and concerns infrastructure. Now, I think I've circulated with my colleagues at least an agenda from Hamilton District Council. Now, my understanding from that is that Hamilton District Council have had the equivalent of MDRS as part of their district plan for, I think, approaching
Lee, I don't think
a decade. These are serious infrastructure questions, Madam Chair, and it concerns Rotorua. So it's a learning from Hamilton Council. Can we perhaps just
get to the question, because I don't think any of us have seen the document that you're referring to, and Stavros won't have any idea.
I'll get there as fast as I can, Madam Chair, yes. So Hamilton Council have effectively had MDRS now for some time, and they've run into a problem where, with all of the intensification that's happened, and I think they've achieved something like 60% intensification over there, their infrastructure is not handling the water, as in the fresh water coming into
Lee,
the house.
I think you're surmising or providing an opinion on behalf of the Hamilton District Council. Is there a question there that you actually have around infrastructure?
I beg your patience, please, Madam Chair. I am getting there.
Could we just perhaps ask the question, because we're actually in questions at the moment?
Yes. So the issue that they have is there's the demands on water and wastewater all across the city, where intensification has happened all across the city, has required that all of their infrastructure across the city needs replacing. And of course, a city can't really afford to replace all of its infrastructure or upgrade all of its infrastructure. So this is the downside of intensification across the whole city. Are we really, by doing this, creating a rod for our own back and creating 3 water bottlenecks and problems all across the whole city?
I think, Councillor Lee, we've got a discussion this afternoon in our council meeting around our 30-year infrastructure strategy, which is designed to deal with that. So I don't know, Stavros, if you want to do just a very quick answer in relation to that, but this is a discussion around Plan Change 9. It's not a discussion around infrastructure requirements.
Madam Chair, very quickly, as you said, we'll discuss later the 30-year infrastructure strategy. Suffice to say that 30-year infrastructure strategy assesses the current and future demand for water and other infrastructure for the district over the next 30 years, including all the housing development proposals, and makes the appropriate recommendations. So we're already accounting for that in our infrastructure strategy.
Thank you. And one final question concerns Papakainga. What were the submissions? Did we have any submissions opposing Papakainga? Obviously, iwi or various iwi entities support it. Did we have any submissions opposing it?
Yes.
What were the nature of the concerns, or were there many? Or
in general, there weren't actually a lot of submissions from a general nature around Papakainga, but yes, there were around. I'm just looking at the team around density. Would you say, Simon? Because it does affect also rural zone. So it's Papakainga across the district more than just residential. So yes, there were some around actual. What should be the density of Papakainga? How many houses should be enabled? That type of thing.
Neighbours concerned about a Papakainga being built nearby, or that sort of thing? Yeah.
No, again, letters went out and identifying neighbours of those. So yes, we have identified and sent as part of those 20,000 letters to ratepayers, but again, very few from neighbours or anything around that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through the Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation today, and Jason, acknowledgement to you and your team on all the hard work. Just a few questions which I'll get through as quickly as I can. Could I just ask, in the report, it talks about design. Now, previously I've asked about design and been told it's actually a very hard thing, and I appreciate beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So now we're sort of saying that we're addressing it. Could you tell me how we're addressing that? Thank you.
There's a few different parts, I guess, to that answer, Councillor, so I'll try to step through that. The actual medium density residential standards comes with its standards, and if you meet those, you go straight to building consent, and that's around height, as you know, height in relation to boundaries, site coverage, and they're actually fairly tight. The Ministry for the Environment then has got, it's non-statutory, but a design guide around, okay, well, what does a good medium density residential development look like? So again, as I say, that's non-statutory, but that's trying to help to say, hey, if you've got some ideas, consider these types of things. Then where the PC9 is for more design around 4+. So that's where if there's a proposal with 4 or more dwellings, or if you're not complying with the performance standards for 3 or less, then there's some design criteria around that. We've also carried out a design guide for 4+, recognising that the Ministry's got theirs for up to 3. What does good design look like for those comprehensive developments for 4 and above? Where the district plan assists with that now is it has got more objectives, policies around that sort of design features that a good development would have.
And I think also part of your request there is about the commercial zones as well. So certainly in the urban, we do actually have an urban planner or urban design capability in-house, so that is used judiciously to review particularly the 4+ and the urban design outcomes that are being proposed. So we actually do have an internal peer review, and we ask questions back on applications where we think there's opportunities to improve the design, or where we've got concerns about the urban assessment that's been undertaken.
Thank you. So could I ask, if you don't mind to follow up, thank you, Madam Chair. So could I ask, as aesthetics, and again, beauty in the eye of the beholder, I'm concerned that we don't end up with more glass boxes, or we don't end up with just something unpleasing to the eye. Are we addressing that? Because previously, again, I reiterate, I was sort of told that's very hard for a planning team to knock back or seek, shall we say, improvement from developers.
Look, yes, it is. So your aversion to glass boxes may not be somebody else's aversion to a glass box, but there is design principles and assessments that the staff would undertake in bulk and form. There's the variation in size and nature of a development to a boundary or within a development. You know, if it's all uniform or one big wall, there's a number of aspects that get discussed from an actual design aesthetic perspective. So that's the sort of, I wouldn't say a scientific, but there's a practice to that. So it's not quite as blunt as saying I don't like square boxes or lots of glass.
Sure.
There is some design criteria that would go into that sort of design impact question, and that also then extends to discussions around landscaping, how you visually or aesthetically manage appearances, but again, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but there is design aspects that make something a good design and things that make things a bad design, so those are teased out.
I'd say also, Councillor, it's a balance between street appeal, neighbours appeal and livability. So there is some objectives, policies around good quality living environments on that to try to actually increase design, that it's quite a nice livable, passive, solar, all of those good urban design outcomes.
Maybe, Councillor, again, maybe not for today, but that as part of our progress reports, maybe there's a case of actually bringing in some of our team to talk about what the design guides say and some of the aspects that are considered, both from a consenting and go back over and distributing the design guide. So maybe it is worth a deeper dive at some point to give you that sort of reassurance that those assessments are undertaken.
Thank you. So just to follow up from that, so you also mentioned ground floor or ground level. So could I ask, so there's a particular development I think going on in, is it not Inamaua, be Perarika Street, I think? I believe that there's going to be residential on the ground floor. Now, I'm not personally opposed to that, but I just wonder, moving forward, is that something we're going to see more of, as opposed to, say, a business, and I'm thinking particularly in a CBD, for example? Pukuatua Street, sorry, I'm being corrected.
That's a consented development that's almost complete. So I think you've heard that the recommendation from the commissioners was to create a higher hurdle to have conversions of ground floors. So you can do it, but you'd start introducing a consent requirement or an assessment requirement. So I think that gets to your issue. That's a current district plan decision. New provisions will mean there's some sort of assessment required to allow residential on ground floor.
Okay, but that would not affect, say, a property development on, say, Whakaui Street? We're only talking... Because Whakaui does have a slightly more residential character.
I think we're talking city centre zone, aren't we? So the extent of that does go down to Whakaui Street? So it does extend to that, so there would be an assessment required there too.
Okay. But for Whakaui, residential could be optional for the ground floor. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's not prohibited. It's not saying no. The way I see it is you're checking in, will it still achieve all of those livable, what you're expecting to see from a streetscape, and then that's through a resource consent process.
Thank you. Could I also ask your comments about the development contribution coming down? Sorry?
Financial contribution.
Financial,
yes.
Sorry. How does that impact on any future developments that we want to see in terms of if, forgive me, I think off the top of my head, our financial is not quite meeting the budgets. So how do you see that addressing, if we're reducing the amount, how does that impact on other things that you put the contribution towards?
There's two aspects to it. So Greenfield remains the same as my understanding. So Greenfield subdivisions is reduced. So again, it goes back to we need to have neighbourhood reserves and greenfields, but it just gets nuanced. So an existing suburb where you put a small dwelling under 72 square metres on the back of a section. So potentially things we've already seen in areas like Glenholm, your reserve contribution is down as low as 1%. So again, it recognises that impact of that division. So we're trying to enable the home, but it's going into an existing area with existing reserves. So the 1% then is now applicable to improvements on reserve. It's not just for land acquisition. So that would give us the chance to say, okay, well, how do we ensure an area where an infilled small dwelling has gone into, that 1% then is a contribution that we know we can then use to upgrade the neighbourhood reserves through the normal processes that you undertake during the LTP.
Thank you. And just my final question, if I could ask, could I see the slide again where you had the high residential 2 up, please? And sorry, next one?
Yeah.
Thank you. So could I ask for the property ends of, Malfoy towards the racecourse there in our bottom right-hand corner?
Oh, Malfoy there.
Sorry, yep, so go towards the racecourse, please. Thank you. So, no, sorry, back along. So from Rannoch onwards, Rannoch down to Fenton, those properties there, those properties that aren't part of the highlighted area, I have a question. So all the neighbouring properties, sorry, I'm not sure what street that'll be, the following ones where it doesn't apply. Yep, thank you. So have you heard from residents in those areas during your submissions?
I'll seek clarification, or we could probably provide that, and that will be on the web. I know from a general sense, from that entire area, yes, we have heard submissions. From the actual specifics, I don't have that in front of me, sorry.
Thank you. And could I ask, so the reason I presume you've included that in for the Zone 2 was the fact that it's so close to the major 2 routes, Fenton, Malfoy and Rannoch? Would that be fair? Main roads?
There's 2 aspects, and this is the stuff that Mr Mathfield would have spoken to you about in the FDS, which is the transport corridors, but equally the CBD fringe. So it's the walkable catchment and accessibility. So that area promoting high density is because of high level accessibility and amenity created by the large reserve areas and the proximity or walking distance to the CBD. So that's why that collar piece is identified there for high density.
Thank you. And final question, could you just remind me, I see the racecourse, I think you made a comment that down the track, I think it's residential 1, is that correct? But it could be changed to residential 2, or if those changes were sought.
Yeah, just a point of clarification, in the operative district plan, it's actually Reserve 3.
Reserve 3.
Yes, in the future development strategy, and this is looking out long-term, sort of 30 years, the strategy is, should it actually have an underlying zoning of some form of residential in terms of that. But again, zoning is only one part of development.
Thank you. So the racecourse block is zoned as Res 3 at the moment?
Correct, and not changed through this process.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillors. Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just before asking my 2 questions, I just want to acknowledge Jason, Simon and all the team. I attended as many meetings as I possibly could, and I heard all the good explanations regarding Papakainga, regarding the villages, and then also we as residents received the letters that came out to us. So I really appreciate that and commend the team. The first question I have was, it was around the housing performance incentives for council. That $1 billion fund, Build for Growth, do we benefit of that only when the homes are built, the new homes are built, or in progress?
Council, again, that refers to that national party policy.
Yes.
And at the moment, we're unclear. It's a bit like what their next steps are. We don't know how they're proposing to implement or put that in place at this stage. The focus has been more of the immediate changes in their 100-day plan. So we're unclear, and it goes to the same question about are we in a good position to have those conversations if they become government policy and move from just being National Party policy pre-election to actually legislative opportunities. So the infrastructure fund they're proposing, I'm sure we'll get a feel for where their first budget goes, and obviously then what their agenda is for legislative change. So at this stage, we are still unclear about whether there would be any benefits to us.
Thank you, JP. You did say it earlier about waiting for the 100 days to find out where it's going. And the other one, it follows on from what Councillor O'Brien touched on. I'm sort of trying to get my head around about the non-residential in the CBD, saying that the ground floor will be available. Is this something being driven by the developers or the tenants themselves? I thought no resident would want to have a ground floor in the CBD.
I definitely think this isn't driven by potential tenants. It's more driven by building developers, and I think for us there's a whole host of other issues which now, with the decision of the commissioners, gives us the chance to traverse, which is the active frontage. You know, how do we keep our streets active? How do we keep that visibility? How do we keep important foot traffic in key streets? So that's all got to be part of those assessments. If you are to remove those active frontage of retail shops or whatever it might be in a particular part of the CBD. So it is an important assessment, and as the councillor raised earlier, it does have an immediate impact when you start taking away those destinations or that intention for people to walk backwards and forwards, or a purpose to have an active street.
Thank you very much. A lot of hard work's been done. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Maxwell. Mayor Tapsell, I think online you have a question.
Yes, thank you very much, and we'll see how this goes with my video on. I'm very sorry I've been having... You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. So I just have a question regarding the geothermal system. So as one of the recommendations was to replace what we currently have with a performance standard, and I'll quote it: performance standard requiring an expert assessment of geothermal hazards and risks to be provided alongside building consent applications for buildings in the Rotorua geothermal system. Now, the Rotorua geothermal system actually covers about 152 kilometres squared of Rotorua. That's pretty significant. Do you know what locations in Rotorua that geothermal system covers, to give us an idea of what areas may be impacted by that change?
Yeah, so just a couple of things on that, Mayor, is how that performance standard will work in practice is that geotech professionals will include a geothermal assessment within their geotech assessment that is accompanying a building consent at the moment. So again, you meet that performance standard by going straight to building consent with an assessment within your existing geotech assessment. Now, the actual spatial extent of that, we're working through that at the moment for our practice note, because again, we're saying that field, as you've rightly said, is so large. Should it apply to the whole, or should it be a lesser area? We're actually working with experts, including GNS at the moment, for that practice note, which is looking at probably a refined area on that. But I would also say a geotech engineer would also turn their mind to, even if you're outside that area, is there geothermal activity that should be taken account of. The last thing we want is somebody to say, I'm inside the line or I'm outside and therefore I won't assess it.
Your Worship, just picking up on that, about 25% of the city footprint is in that geothermal fields, and again, it's part of that, well known to our geotech professionals, and so they would also be making those assessments. In my simple head, I do things like, if someone's doing a geotech which is looking at the normal features of, is it stable, they've also got a lens on, is it venting, and is the ground hot. So there's a bunch of other factors then which would say you actually need to do a more significant assessment.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm just a bit concerned that requiring an expert assessment when, as you have mentioned, Jason, usually the geotechnical engineering report would consider that, or they'll turn their mind to it. I'm just concerned that it could be additional red tape that may be quite costly. We all know we live on active thermal field. It's what makes Rotorua incredibly unique. But actually, I'm just concerned that could cause unintended consequences of restricting development. And my second concern, which is also my second question, is whether we have readily available in Rotorua that expert opinion, given that it has not been required in the past. So I understand that the submission that has influenced this recommendation came from the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. My question to that, on my next concern, is who will actually be expected to assess this? Would it be a staff member of Regional Council, or will the developer, whether it's a family or a company, have to seek external advice that may actually come outside of Rotorua for the Rotorua geothermal system?
Yes. Yeah, look, those are the considerations also of our team, Your Worship, on that. And the first one about red tape, I agree. And we've had working parties with industry, with consultants, developers on that. And look, there's various options. One option considered was, okay, let's get a resource consent for everyone, but that's just going to add more complexity, and what is the value added through that process. So that's where we've come up with working what is the least costly red tape approach to that is, at the time of building consent, including it within an existing geotech assessment. What the practice note also does is sort of like a sieve exercise where a layperson can actually go through quite usefully to see what are the signs of geothermal activity on the site, and actually start honing it down. If you're the designer, developer, or anybody is, what is the chance of actually having geothermal activity on there? And then most buildings, if not all, would require a geotech assessment at any stage. Does that answer your second question? Sorry?
I think
yes, thank you very much. It does. But I still do remain just a little bit concerned that there could be, we want anyone who needs to be able to develop. And
yes.
The cost of already developing is quite expensive with geotech reports, also development contributions now. That is my only concern. But thank you very much for answering. Those are the only questions that I did have. The report and your summary today and the presentation have been incredibly good. Thank you so much. I know this has been a very large piece of work, but I appreciate that along this way, the Rotorua has really been taken into consideration in terms of what does our community need, but also how do we make this the best place to continue to live and to work in the most affordable way. And I can see that and that intention coming through in the report. So
Thank you, Mayor Tapsell. I just wondered if we could just take the morning break now. I'm just conscious that we're short for time at the moment. I'm just wondering if we could take a short break now until 10 past, and then we'll resume at 10 past for the taking of the motion and the deliberations on the notice of motion. So just conscious too, we've got our CCO, CEOs and Kevin Ward, our Chair of our Airport Board. So perhaps if you'd like to join councillors for a cup of tea. Thank you.
recording.
We'll resume the meeting now. We've had extensive question time this morning. I'd indicated earlier on that I was happy to move the recommendation, so I will move the recommendation now. Thank you, JP and Jason, for the presentation and answering the questions. Thank you. You can step away from the table since we'll now move into the debate. So I have signalled that I will move that the committee accept the recommendations of the Independent Hearings Panel on Plan Change 9, Housing for Everyone Attachment 1, and amend the district plan accordingly. 2, that the committee delegate to the Chief Executive the authority to make any changes that are of minor effect or to correct a minor error. And next, that the committee instructs staff to publicly notify an operative date for Plan Change 9, Housing for Everyone, as soon as possible. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Maxwell. As the mover of the motion, I think we've spent quite a lot of time on this morning. As I mentioned before, this is the last piece in the planning documentation, our strategy that we need to do. It also ensures that we are going to deliver on the Council's priorities, which is ensuring sufficient zoning for residential, sufficient zoning for commercial and industrial, and ensuring that we have different kinds of housing typologies. We will, through this process, remove the restrictions on our planning rules. It means that we will then have modern and fit-for-purpose planning rules, which we haven't had up until now. And it's been a long time in the making. We've spent 4 years, even longer, in terms of this. We've signed off all of the other pieces of work, so the future development strategy, which looked at our 30-year zoning. And this is the last piece in the toolkit, I suppose, to ensure that we are providing the right zoning and capacity for the future of Rotorua. So I'm more than happy to support the recommendation. I'd like to thank the staff, in particular JP, your team, Jason, Simon, Kim, and the rest of the team, Damon, who are also involved. I think councillors have echoed those thoughts around the chamber. And also to the community. There has been extensive community consultation throughout this process. There have been various hearings, submissions, and the community has been involved and has had the opportunity to have their say in this. We're ensuring that we're going to have a city that we can be proud of and delivers on what we require for the future. So more than happy to move the motion. And Councillor Maxwell, do you have anything that you wish to say as the seconder?
More than the motion.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That was Councillor Maxwell indicating that he was happy to support the motion by seconding it and didn't wish to add anything further. Are there any further comments that people wish to make? Your Worship, the Mayor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, through you. Look, can I just acknowledge the significant amount of work in the years that have gone on to this. I also especially want to acknowledge everyone who took time to make a submission on this. And also, of course, the fact that we had an independent hearing panel. I think the process has been incredibly well run. I know that we have received really good feedback and regards in how this process has been run here in Rotorua. I think that we can be quite proud of the fact that this not only reflects what our community needs, but has also taken into consideration community concerns and provided appropriate recommendations. So I'm very happy to support this. There is without a doubt an intense need for more housing. What we hope that this will do is ensure that we're enabling housing for all. I like that it is called housing for everyone, because unfortunately Rotorua has had the spotlight on the housing that does.
I think we've just lost you briefly.
But we know that,
perhaps you'd just like to repeat the last couple of comments with your... Thank you, that might be better.
Thank you. Just happy to support this. I think that it would be a very big and good step in the right direction for solving the housing crisis here in Rotorua. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Any further comments, councillors? Councillor Kiriopa.
Kia ora, thank you. I'll be voting against today. There are two reasons I'd like to share. The first is the enabling of non-residential activities associated with papakainga. This is a hard one for me While to a certain extent the end goal for hapu is to be able to live peacefully within our own restored papakainga communities, supported by our own circular economies, meaning the time and energy of our people is focused on the needs of our whānau and hapu, which may require commercial and industrial activities established in close proximity to residential areas. When I look at the disaster that is Rotorua Road, with childcare and health services taking up a majority of space within what should be a papakainga residential area, when you look at the harm that has been caused to the environment and communities of Whitaker Road, Ngāpuna, Whakarewarewa and Ngongotahā due to the rezoning of those residential areas to mixed commercial residential, and the fact that Rotorua is just not that big, and existing commercial and industrial areas are within reasonable, accessible distances for a majority of our hapu, I don't support that part. The second part, as I'm sure everyone will be aware, who's been listening to council meetings at least, is that within this there is no protection afforded to our existing papakainga communities. While Mā Tātua Marae have achieved a win for our Rotorua Road whānau and hapu, there is nothing within the plan that even acknowledges the existence of our papakainga communities, which have been here for 1,000 years before this council even came into existence. They're not recognised. The protection of our communities from further impacts of intensification and urbanisation is the very reason that I decided to stand for council. But because it doesn't fit within current council systems, policy, nothing that I tried to highlight to council staff before I even became a councillor or since I became a councillor has been considered. I know it was heard. I know that it was very clearly understood what I was trying to say, but it was disregarded because it doesn't fit within the current systems. And for that reason, I'll be voting against it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Kiriopa. Just in the interests of time, we've heard in favour of the motion.
On page 20 of the report, contractual housing enablements targets identified in the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund contract for $85 million. So I looked up that Infrastructure Acceleration Fund RFP response form, and it states, through the intensification plan change, which this is, RLC is anticipating significant brownfield infield developments. We do believe that there will be further opportunities within the area enabled by this project and the intensification plan change, such as Springfield Golf Course. Yes, there it is again. 2017 spatial plan clearly identified Springfield and the racecourse as opportunities to create new suburbs. In black and white. Says again in 2018, the same document. Page 4 of our future development adoption presentation on the 22nd of November clearly shows Springfield Golf Course as part of MDRS. Big, bold yellow. JP stated at that meeting that was part of the 2016 district plan, that plan change had happened. So this all, to me, is just another step in the process. And for our community, I cannot support that. I cannot support that in good conscience. Until that issue is put to bed, I will not support that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillors, as I signalled before, we've heard 3 in favour and 2 against, which is required under the standing orders. Given that we are short for time, I'm going to now put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? Motion. Your Worship, can I just get your indication because your camera is off?
I support this motion.
Thank you. The motion is carried. Thank you. You can call for a division. So all those in favour, please raise your hands. Your Worship, your camera's not on. Is your hands raised?
So I'm just having connection issues.
That's right.
But I just raised my hand.
Thank you. Thank you. And those against? Thank you. The motion has been carried.
I do have to read it out.
Okay.
Was called.
Thank you. I think in terms of process, I think it's pretty obvious that it's been carried. Okay, thank you. We're just confirming, because it was a division, but I think it was fairly clear from the show of hands that the motion has been carried, that it's not necessary to read out the names. So thank you very much, everyone. We'll move on now to the next part of our agenda, which is the Rotorua Regional Airport CCO quarterly report. Can I have a mover and a seconder that the quarterly report be received? Thank you, Councillor Waru. Seconded, Councillor Brown. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, thank you, carried. Welcome, Nicole, and also a very warm welcome to Kevin Ward as our brand new airport chair. This is your first meeting as chair, and you joined the board recently and took over as chair at the beginning of this year. So, Kevin, I wondered if you just wanted to say a few words of introduction.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, councillors and Excellency. Great opportunity for me to put into practice some things that I've been doing in the earlier part of my career. Just a brief background, I was the Chief Executive of the Aviation Regulatory Agency, the Civil Aviation Authority, for about 9 years. And then became a one-person consulting firm doing strategy and regulation work. And then for the last 12 or 13 years, I was the Chief Executive of the Airports Association of New Zealand. So aviation and airports have been very dear to me. And in particular, while I've been at the Airports Association, I was very interested in making sure that our regional airports were strong and could thrive and serve their communities and help develop the nation from a more provincial angle. Typically, the big airports are well resourced and can look after themselves, but we had to go into bat for regional airports a number of times, and I was very happy to do that, and we made some good progress with the government and the ministers through that period. So I was very pleased to have the opportunity to join Rotorua. Even more pleased that you've got 2 lovely days here for my current visit, because it was a bit miserable down in Wellington. The wind is back, the spring wind has chased us right through summer, so I'm glad to have avoided that, and very pleased to meet the council formally and have an opportunity to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Kevin, and councillors, there will be further opportunity to meet Kevin, and sorry we had to rush through the morning tea break, but I'm just aware with the shortness of time, Nicole, you have no presentation this morning. Councillors, we will take the report as read, and if there are any questions for Nicole or Kevin, now would be the time to ask them. Unless there's anything just quickly you wanted to highlight, Nicole?
No, nothing to highlight, just everything as per the report, but happy to take questions.
Thank you, Nicole. Councillor O'Brien, followed by Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the Chair. Thank you, Nicole. Kevin, welcome. Could I just ask now, sorry, I know this is slightly outside what your report is, but I think I read a report in the Daily Post a couple of weeks ago about a reduction or possible reduction in flights from Auckland. Are you able to comment on that at the moment, or?
Yes, so it's not a reduction and they just haven't yet returned since COVID. And so we have replied back to the Daily Post with a thorough response outlining the things that we are doing and trying to support to enable that. And obviously getting air connectivity, and in particular for the Auckland Rotorua and Auckland Christchurch Rotorua routes, is very important to us. We're working with Andrew's team with Air New Zealand to pass on all the information we can. One thing we do reiterate to everyone in the city is to use the airport as a conduit for passing on information. If there is feedback that the city can give us on why air connectivity is not serving them, then I would gratefully receive that feedback. Concrete evidence is very helpful to us, and I can collate that and share that with Air New Zealand. So that's the most useful thing that the members of the city can do, or to help us support that argument and get the connectivity that we need as a city.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through the chair, I just see on page 23 there at the bottom, you've commissioned a energy master plan to assess future energy needs, including the business park and decarbonisation of rental and aircraft fleets. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yep, sure. So this was instigated, you know that Rotorua Airport participated in the Air New Zealand expression of interest for the next generation aircraft, and through that process it became very clear for us and a lot of other airports that if everyone does what they need to do or everything they're talking about doing in the next 10, 15 years, a lot of electricity will be required to produce hydrogen, to charge rental car fleets, to charge electric aircraft. Nothing is confirmed, nothing is in, but we wanted to look at what are all those things that are in the pipeline and how we positioned to be able to respond to that. Can we get sufficient energy from the grid? So that report has just been finalised at the moment, will be presented to the board this week, and board papers going out tomorrow. Also got a meeting, just scheduled in a meeting now actually, while I've been waiting to bring JP and Andrew Wilson up to speed on that as well, because I know council staff are starting to think about these things as well from a citywide perspective, and have a meeting planned with Unison as well. So just starting to join all the dots, and at the moment it's very much an information gathering stage, so we can look at what we may or may not need to plan for in the future. That will become part of board discussions and board strategy as well about what we achieve.
Right, so would the drive towards electric be driven by the rental car companies? Or?
Yes, so the airport's an enabler for other businesses to come and use our facilities. So it's not something that we're driving, but it's something that we may need to enable if other people want to do that. So if Air New Zealand starts suddenly wanting to come bring electric aircraft, then we need to be able to charge those aircraft, and we don't want to be caught behind the 8 ball and not be planning so that we can be ready to go when it happens. So at this stage, it's just purely an information gathering exercise. We haven't done anything with that, but it is something that we're looking at to make sure that we're forward thinking and being strategic about our actions.
Yes, the grid limitations with Unison are likely to be an issue from what I have heard from my...
we haven't identified any issues as yet, but we do have meetings planned with Unison, and we will be working through that, and it's all part of the process. But we needed this information to understand what it looks like before we could have those conversations in more detail.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Maxwell.
Madam Chair, thank you, Nicole and Chair. The question I have is, Air New Zealand have advised that we aren't shortlisted for their first next-gen aircraft, and yet they're aware we have the capability. And surely they know that tourism is one of our top ones, and yet we're being overlooked. Have you any thoughts on that?
The first aircraft coming in is a cargo aircraft, and there's a lot of factors that Air New Zealand needed to take into consideration. So I know that we were seriously considered, and they are fully aware of all our strengths as an airport and as in a region and what we can bring. While we're not currently being considered, it doesn't mean that we won't be in future, but obviously that's Air New Zealand's decision and they need to work through their own processes and make their decisions. I'm sure there are other airports equally in the country that would be able to support the next gen demonstrator. Air New Zealand just had to make a decision based on all the information they had. But they're fully aware that we're very supportive and would be happy to work with them if and when the opportunity presents itself.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for your report. My question is also outside the scope of what was written. I saw something about Heathrow Airport. Now, I'm not saying that Rotorua anyway, in any shape or form, is close to Heathrow, but it showed something that I'd never really considered. The runoff from the runway, from the aircraft, etc., because of the scale of their operation, they actually have their own treatment plant for that. And this is separate to anything to do with sewage. This is just their runoff from the runway and washing down of planes, fuel, etc., etc. Do we have anything like that that stops it from getting into the lake? Or is that just filtered naturally through the ground?
Off the runway, it's filtered naturally from the ground. We do have separators on Gate 5 and 6, which is the large aircraft stand at the end, where the old international A320s used to land. So there are separators around there. There are separators down the other end. So anything around where fueling takes place, those types of things off the apron, there are separators for that, but not on the runway specifically.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your leniency. Nicole and Kevin, could I just ask very quickly, I understand that the landing lights technology is nearing the end of its natural life at some point. Can you advise, does the airport responsible for that, or is one of the transport or civil aviation authorities? Who's actually responsible for covering that cost? Thank you.
So currently all airfield, AGL it's called, airfield ground lighting, is owned by Airways. So that is something that is not traditionally the case internationally. Internationally, the airport company itself would own the airfield ground lighting assets. We own the ducting that the cables are in, and then they own the cables within that ducting and the lights. So currently, Airways are on a trajectory to dispose of all their airfield ground lighting and transfer it over to the airport companies. We have engaged in that process with Airways, and we are currently getting a condition assessment report done on our lighting so we can understand what the next steps may look like for us. So we're working through the process to understand where we need to head. But at the moment, there is a trajectory within New Zealand for the airport companies to take over lighting from Airways.
Thank you. Sorry. So could I just, I'm a little bit stuck. So at the moment it's in limbo. It's with the, sorry, who did you say, the Airways?
Yeah, so it's currently owned by Airways.
But they wish to transfer it over to us?
Yes.
So who would be, is that part of the negotiation to say, well, who's responsible depending on the condition and whether they need replacing, or who's going to wear the cost?
Yes, exactly. So the airport would need to purchase that, and then the cost of that would be recouped through airline pricing.
Thank you. Yep. And I suppose you're putting that through your, if it needs to happen through depreciation, or it'll be
exactly, it will be
assets?
treated in the same way as all our other assets, and it's something that we need to work through the process to understand. So again, we're in very much an information gathering stage at that. It's not something that we're doing in a big hurry. It's something we want to do in a very considered manner.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Wari.
Tēnā koe te tiamana, tēnā kōrua. Kevin, nice to have you here today. Thank you for your kōrero and your report. And I'll be quick, read through it obviously, and there's a couple of lines in there I just want to ask you about, get some clarity around. So one was, I think it was one of your 5 key priorities was to be financially sustainable. And the other one was for the vision, critical to the success of the Kaupa, was to extend your manaakitanga to enhance our care of guests, aharane. So I'm just wondering, it's a one question, but I've got two parts. Can you give me a bit more information about what that looks like? What do you mean by financially sustainable? How will that, in your mind, be achieved?
Yeah, so under Be Financially Sustainable, we have a group of headings that we've agreed with the board as part of our strategy as to what that looks like. It's things like reducing reliance on RLC funding, it's diversifying revenue so we're not so heavily reliant on landing fees. So there are a number of things under that, and then under that again, there is actions that or initiatives that we seek to take each year to move us further towards that goal.
Yeah, the other one was extend our manaakitanga. Can you just extend on that line for me, please?
That's more of an overarching principle for everything that we wish to achieve. So obviously the airport sees itself as a very a big contributor and an important part of Rotorua. We receive obviously a lot of manuhiri through the airport and locals alike, and we want to make sure that we are projecting the manaakitanga of the region and welcoming everybody in true Rotorua style. So it's more of an overarching principle rather than something that it's something we applied to everything. Manaakitanga is actually also one of the 3 core values for company values for our staff as well.
I was going to say that it's a value, really, isn't it?
It's a value,
Kia ora.
yes.
And just one last quick question, it's probably aimed at you, Kevin. You know, given the kaupapa with the whenua and all that out there, would you say that a priority could possibly be, because it's not in here, to grow and strengthen the relationship with mana whenua, unuku kōpako?
Thank you. Yes, I very much agree with that. There's already a written memorandum of understanding between Ngāti Unuku Kōpako and the airport, which specifically talks about building that relationship and a basis of trust between the two organisations. And I'm meeting the representatives of the mana whenua this afternoon to make my own introductions and assurances that we'll be working together.
Thank you, and that's good to hear. Kia ora.
Thank you. No further questions, councillors? No, there doesn't look like to be. Thank you very much, Nicole and Kevin. Lovely to see you here, and look forward to working with you again in the future and seeing you here back in the chamber for hopefully not so quite a brief presentation. Thank you. We'll move now to the Rotorua NZ CCO quarterly report. Can I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report? Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Seconded, Councillor Maxwell. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, thank you, that is carried. Welcome, Andrew, without Tim today. Once again, in the interests of time, you have actually given us a very substantial written report, so councillors will take the report as read, and I'll take questions from the councillors to Andrew for any matters that are in the report.
Can I just add a quick comment? Obviously, my chair, Tim Cossa, just provided his apologies. He had an urgent matter to deal with in Wellington, so he did want me to give his apologies for today also.
Thank you for that, Andrew. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did look through the report to see if what I was going to ask was in there, but it wasn't. We had a previous report that I believe Thomas Collet presented to us, which talked about the financial performance. I think it was our fees and charges were down at this time of the year, and I was quite concerned as to why, and it had something to do with the visitor numbers not being what we expected. Not so much the international, but the domestic. So then my following question was, well, why do you think that is? So he couldn't answer that. He said to ask our Chief Executive, Andrew Wilson. So would you mind elaborating on that, please?
Yeah, look, and I'll try and keep this brief. You know, you'll recall we've had a number of conversations around some of the reputational challenges that we're suffering through as a city, and certainly, you know, while we've had strong performance in the international visitor markets over the summer period, domestic is definitely still lagging. Yep.
Thank you.
Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Maxwell.
I'll be brief. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Andrew. And pleasingly, on page 27, I read with interest the marketing communications. Already onto it with the strengthening the reputation of Rotorua and building the brand equity. How do you feel it's going so far?
Yeah, very much a work in progress. I think we've got an opportunity to provide a more informal update to councillors next week. So we do look forward to doing that. The team are, we've worked really hard to just reprioritise our current work program to get that work started. Acknowledging obviously there's going to be some limitations in terms of what we can do within existing funding, but we're pretty keen to get started ahead of the next financial year. So we've got some exciting things in the pipeline, and we'll look forward to sharing a little bit more detail with you around that.
Thank you. No other questions, councillors? Councillor Wari.
Tēnā koe te tiamana. Kia ora, Andrew. Always good to see you there in the hot seat. There was a part in your report, where did I see that? So the events. Has there been events and investment? Sorry, so there's two parts. So the investment thing, how are we doing on that front? I didn't really get a feeling of where that is at the moment, in terms of attracting business, any commercial companies, etc., to the district. And the other one was around marketing, which I think Councillor Maxwell, Uncle Trev, just touched on around, are there any kaupapa that are currently happening where we could tautoko to make it more impactful, or things like that, have they been identified?
Right, so the business attraction, investment attraction piece, I'll be blunt that it's pretty challenging market conditions out there at the moment. So, certainly from a construction cost perspective, the conditions are really challenging. We've certainly had some feedback that there is some tenant interest around some of the new industrial land that's going to come to market, and that some of that is from out of town, which is really positive. So we'll take that as an encouraging sign. I think, a little bit what some of the feedback we've had from, particularly from the business community, when we've been out and we've done the business confidence surveys, is that the reputational challenges impact them as well. Certainly from attracting talent and from attracting investment, that kind of lingers over that kind of space as well. So it kind of just underlines just how important, to turn that set of perceptions around. And I should use the word, they are very much perceptions. It isn't reality. So again, that's a big focus for us. In terms of the marketing space, look, we're really working quite hard at the moment to try and think about what alliances we need to be building. You'll see some reference in there. I know our trade guys have done a little bit of work with Queenstown into North America, which is great. We obviously work very closely with our Central North Island colleagues to think about what kind of collection of kind of regions we put into some of those key markets. Obviously, an international visitor doesn't just come for Rotorua, they come for an itinerary that includes obviously a range of destinations. And I think the other opportunity for us is to think, quite carefully around how we work more closely with Auckland over the coming years. So lots going on in that space, yeah.
No, I think you, Andrew, and I know you alluded, you've got a couple of paragraphs in there around those things. I just thought there might be something in there that you might not have mentioned in there that might be good for us to know. The other thing is that our branding, and you talked about it. I know it's part of destination management plan as well and all that. How are we doing on that front in terms of, I know you're talking reputational rebuild and, getting that back up, but how are we doing on that? What is our brand?
Sorry
for the hard question, but
I can send you the brand guidelines, and I think we've done a lot of work around the place brand. I think there's still a little bit more work to do in terms of just refining that and making sure we've got the application of that correct. We've always said that, look, we're taking, we've done the hard yards in terms of understanding what the brand is and what the visual identity is, but we were never going to go and do a Spark style rebrand where we spend a couple of $1 million and rebrand everything in one night. We're taking the time to, as renewals occur, as we've got opportunities to replace things, to make sure that we're delivering that consistently with the brand. Have we got it completely right? No. Have we got a little bit of work to do just to correct a few things and to tweak it? Absolutely. But I think, everyone's on the same kind of journey to make sure that we do that. I think we do have a really strong understanding of what our brand identity is, and it is really powerful. We've now really got to bring those values to life. Yeah.
So now we've got to make that powerful out there.
Absolutely.
Kia ora. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions? There don't appear to be any further questions, so thank you very much, Andrew. I think that having been at the BMX over the weekend and seeing the report in the paper, I think in terms of our reputation, we have shown that Rotorua is a world-class BMX destination, and one of the things that was highlighted to me by people that were attending that was the manaakitanga shown by not only the officials and people at the BMX, but just in Rotorua in general, and that they enjoyed the fantastic time that they had while they were here training before the event. So I think that's all good news going to that reputation rebuild as well.
Yeah, and I should just build on that, the national profile we got around that was really positive. I had a lot of colleagues from around the country commenting, just how much positive media coverage we got from that event. And I'd also kind of comment, obviously this weekend with the Tarawera Ultra on, the place is going to be chocker. We are absolutely full to the brim. There's close to 2,500 international competitors here. It's exactly the kind of thing that really puts us on the world stage. So, lots of good things to be positive around.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you, councillors. We will just take a minute, get to page 33 on your agenda. So we're on to the corporate services report. So can I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report? Thank you, Councillor Barker, seconded by Councillor Brown. Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, thank you, carried. And I'd like to invite Thomas to overview your report, but I think we'll take that as read unless there's anything in particular you wanted to highlight.
No, take it as read. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Thomas. Councillors, any questions for Thomas? No? Oh, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your report. I hope I'm not jumping ahead. Excuse me one sec.
We're on pages 33 to 37.
Right, no, I withdraw that. Sorry.
Okay, questions for the
next
next
report.
Councillor Waru.
Tēnā koe he te te mana. First time I've heard Don do that. Thomas, tēnā koe. Thank you for the report. Just a quick question around the student numbers that are attending the education program that we had a big kōrero about not that long ago. What are the numbers compared to other years or other times, similar time, as to compare in terms of the numbers? How are they sitting?
Pre-COVID.
I'm actually not too sure on that one, Councillor. I haven't had any feedback from the team to say it is any different, but I'm happy to ask the team to include some commentary into next month's report on a comparison on previous years.
Thank you. I look forward to that, and also I'm very just want to acknowledge Ngāi Te Pūkau Education Endowment Trust, who gets nearly 4,000 of our students in this community to that program. So, ka nui te mihi.
Kia ora, Councillor Waru. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Thomas, the technical maintenance on the gear, sulphur corrosion, what's the background to that? Are we experiencing issues?
So, in normal fashion, during the Christmas period, both the Energy Event Centre and the Performing Arts Centre don't have bookings because it's generally a quieter period, and we do thorough maintenance testing and verification of the equipment. I think there is one piece of kit in the Performing Arts Centre that is exhibiting some corrosion that's higher than expected, and so the team are just looking at options with regards to putting preventative measures in place to deal with that.
Cool.
But it's just on one piece of equipment that we're aware of so far.
A little bit exciting looking at the Phantom of the Opera, the Royal New Zealand Ballet and the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra. That's a good looking lineup right there. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Councillors, will move on now to page 38, which is the Community and District Development Report. Welcome back, JP. Can I have a move and a seconder to receive the report? Thank you, Councillor Waru. Seconded, Councillor Barker. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, thank you, carried. JP, once again, I'm just conscious we're nearly at the luncheon break. I'll take the report as read unless there's anything significant that you want to highlight. It's a fairly extensive report. So, councillors, any questions? Councillor Patterson.
Got myself in the right spot. Thank you, Madam Chair. Page 45, the CCTV incident report and the arrests made. Pretty confronting reading. Is this growth from 200 in August to almost 600 in December only due to increased monitoring by our team because we had extra people on go, or is crime kind of getting out of control here? It's tripled in the space of 5 months.
Councillor, it's a good question, and actually it goes to the monitoring. So that extra surveillance that we're putting in place has enabled the team to more effectively scan and contribute, particularly for police prosecution. So yeah, it's not a rapid and horrendous escalation in incidents.
Excellent, thank you. Glad to hear that. One subsequent question. Under the page 51, community summer activations, I don't see any reference to the work of Tātou Pōnamu in here. I believe we're partners with them, and the council logo is on all of their marketing about their events. For example, their whānau fun days, after school activations. Are any of our team actively involved in that?
Councillor, good question. Not quite in my team's area, so it might be a case of just directing that to Stavros's team. It might be a link then through to the events teams that either sit in the community events side, which is Rob Bekethley's team, or into the events and venues teams, which also do the activations, which is Thomas's area. So I don't have an answer, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Waru.
Kia ora, te tiamana, kia ora anō, kia ora JP. Thank you for your another report. E mihi ana kia koe. Well, I've just got a few things here, and I'll be very quick. 25% drop in December, and that's in the for the behaviour, bad anti-social behaviour in the CBD. And that was in December, and it was 25% less than in November. Has there been some kind of different approach, or was there more security around, or something? What?
Look, I think towards the back end of last year, we had some incidents, and that were very unfortunate incidents, particularly focused on Jean Batten Park. I think that led, and I think this goes to the community hub discussion, that closer partnership with police. So there's been a number of reflections on some of those incidents, and some modified either monitoring or patrols or screening of those things. So I think there is a question about, was there some particular incidents that occurred in that month, but equally I think the way the teams are working both with Māori wardens, police and our own guardians plus security, I think we're starting to address those and reflecting on what we've learnt. So timing's really important, presence, identification of those individuals that are causing problems. So yeah, there's been a number of interventions which I believe have cumulatively helped us see a drop in those numbers.
Do you see that continuing, that trend?
Look, I hope so. There is always the challenges we have. I think one of the things that we're now seeing is we'll now go into a new phase, which is the return to school. So again, it was their holiday period. We had some particular challenges with younger people in the city over the summer holidays. We're into a different phase. So again, it's a case of seeing what happens, making sure those teams continue to talk and are able to address issues as they see them.
you, JP. And just another question around the infringement notices for dog owners. I noticed they've gone out. What's the response been?
Yeah, good question. I think I reported to you that the issue that we had, which was upward of approximately 1,600 people had not paid their dog registrations. I think when that information was discussed in the agenda or in the report, there was an immediate uptick in people paying. So we ended up sending out, as per what we'd signalled to you, 1,400 letters. Just over 1,400 letters. I think positively we're seeing 400 plus responses so far, so about a third have now immediately responded within that 28 days to try and avoid the infringement notice. We're now getting to the infringement notice on the remaining just under 1,000.
Kapai, thank you, JP. And also I just want to acknowledge you acknowledging in your report the establishment of the Rotorua Youth Council. I think that's very good, and I was privileged to be a part of that whole kaupapa when they were inducted into the council. So that was really cool of you to put that in. Also, and I should have mentioned it in the last quarter when we had Thomas up there. I think Andrew he mentioned the ultra marathon this weekend, bringing in about 2,500 people over 2 days, and then when you do a comparison, with some of these other kaupapa, we've had national basketball, Māori basketball tournament, 3,500 people over 6 days. So, these are things to keep in mind there, Huama, when we think about kaupapa. It's not always about going to the internationals or something. Sometimes it's just right on our front doorstep. So, kia ora.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Maxwell. Councillor O'Brien, followed by Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the Chair. Thank you, JP. JP, could I just ask in regards to bigging, it says here that there's been several biggers have been summoned to court and or fined for impeding traffic. Could you just elaborate on that for a second for me?
Yes, so again, part of that relationship we've got with police now is just to investigate some of those options around what's happening in that space. So jointly, we wrote to Waka Kotahi and asked for permission to, on a traffic safety basis, to trespass people out of the intersections, where obviously they do become a distraction and a risk to themselves and a distraction to other drivers. Waka Kotahi declined our offer to, on their behalf, issue trespass notices, and they have a national relationship with the police, so police are able to trespass people. So as part of and you've seen people receive the low-level fines and court summons, so police have started an operation with us where we record and recognise who the people are repeatedly begging in the intersections and in areas of the city. We then go through a process of giving them other options of where they could go, asking them politely to move on, and then the subsequent escalations go through to the police issuing infringement notices, and the last step is trespass notices. And as we say, we're recording information about who's involved, so we have that evidence base to show where they return, and it escalates still further. So we're systematically working our way through that with the police.
Thank you. So where you say for impeding traffic, what about the beggars that aren't impeding traffic?
There's same sort of escalations, Councillor. So again, we talk to the people about whether they need to be directed to some social services or wraparound services. Some obviously decline that and to continue to decline that. We do talk to shop owners, and we've just had another session with the Chamber of Commerce making their members aware that where people are loitering or begging or sleeping rough on their premises, they are entitled to trespass them. So we've just provided that information to them so they can undertake that. And part of that is also to engage with the police. So we're setting up a procedure there for the chamber. Again, begging is very limited in what you can do. So it's about not impeding people, not intimidating, and so there's the human rights issue. So this has been some of the challenges in other areas. So we've just just need to make sure that there's not intimidation, not disruption or blockage of the carriageway, and there's no safety issues. So we're carefully working our way through those to discourage and encourage them to not beg and move on. So we're same sort of process we're going through with the intersections, but it's a little more problematic within the CBD.
So can I ask, so has anyone been fined or been brought before courts for begging that hasn't been involved on the intersections or a major roadway?
Not at this stage.
Okay. Could I ask, on the 9th of February, we received a copy of the Heads Up, which, forgive me, I'm not sure if it's been put in the Daily Post yet. You said that there was no intention at the current time to be putting in a begging bylaw.
That, to my understanding of your position, is correct.
Okay, thank you. I'm a little bit surprised at that because I have verbally said, like to yourself and some of your team, that that's exactly where I believe that we were heading. And in fact, I actually have communications from Her Worship the Mayor and the previous CE that they were fully aware of what I was planning to do. And I'm happy to bring those plans forward. I'm just a little concerned that we seem to be, had we moved faster, perhaps dealing with this issue last year when it was much smaller, we may not have found ourselves in where we are currently today. So can I just ask, what sort of steps are we taking in terms of begging to advance this to try and end this for their own safety? I see, unfortunately, some homeless person has been attacked by a group of youths. So it's not just about them, it's also about their safety and well-being as well. Thank you.
Yep, I appreciate that, Councillor. I think from what we signalled probably in that heads up was that there is actually some avenues for us to pursue within our current general bylaws and traffic bylaws. So that's what we've been doing. We have done some research on the probably the most pronounced bylaw referencing beggars, which was the 2015 bylaw from Tauranga. Which was actually had enforcement issues and has actually been rescinded in 2020. So, as I say, we were pursuing from our view the opportunities that exist within our current bylaws and current legal provisions. So at this stage, the necessity or the issue of going off and trying to seek our own bylaw, where others have been before and they have not been successful, has not been pursued. So I don't believe we would have gone any faster. A bylaw process would also, at the minimum, probably be 6 months process if we can find something that is actually legally enforceable. So that's why we're trying to work within the current provisions and talking actively with the police about how to achieve those things. As I say, there's a human rights issue here about people who are not intimidating, not blocking, or not creating any safety issues. So there are some challenges there about where we can go legally.
So could I just ask, so if I can't just decide to play a musical instrument out on a public footpath, I have to seek, forgive me if I remember rightly, the permission of the store I'm in front of, and also the store overside. Now, can you explain to me, on one hand, how I need to be asking for permission on one hand, on the other hand, you're saying, no, we already have a current bylaw that we feel we can do stuff with. How come we were not doing it? Because I think there's a real concern in the community that we appear to be doing nothing.
Well, we are, Councillor, doing things, and we are working closely with the police on moving on these recidivist beggars in different locations. So if I proceed to the next bit, I probably need to roll a lawyer in to start having that conversation about where we can and can't cross that line into behaviours that do not affect other people, so that human rights. But and I don't know how you sing, but I think there would be a question and then about the kind of disturbance that is there. So the busking actually starts hitting a different sort of volume, literally, of impacts on the surrounding area versus someone who is not intimidating, not blocking traffic, and not creating safety issues. So that's the small that's the issue that sits at the heart of this.
Okay, I think I'll leave it for today. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I had Councillor Brown next, but I understand, Your Worship, you have a question that follows on from this. So if I take that question first.
Yes, thank you. Yes, please, that's okay. Thank you, Councillor Brown. I just wanted to address the point raised.
Oh, I think you're frozen again, Your Worship, maybe the camera off.
Councillor O'Brien, yes, he's correct. We have had discussions regarding, I wanted to say that Councillor O'Brien is correct. There have been discussions regarding a begging bylaw. However, we have not formally processed that or begun steps towards that. But what I have done is I have reached out to the new Police Minister, Mark Mitchell. We are just waiting to confirm a date, and I hope that in discussions with him, we can continue to find better solutions to the social issues that are occurring. You may have noticed the front page of the Rotorua Daily Post today. It shows very clearly that us as Rotorua Lakes Council and the police are doing all we can. I just want to note that the begging that the community has been complaining about in particular has been regarding in the middle of the intersections, of which the Land Transport Act comes under, which is why partnering with the New Zealand Police is very important. So it wasn't a question, but I was just wanted to provide additional answer to Councillor O'Brien's point. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll take the question now from Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, JP, for the report. Parking. The meters, in your report, you say meter reliability was down to 91%. What is that reliability like over a longer period of time? And how many meters have we got? Can you remind me?
Well, I think we've got something like 68 or 69 metres across the city. I think what you're highlighting in there has been an issue for us, which is one of our performance standards in the contract is 95% availability of machines. You've noted it, Councillor O'Brien has previously in these progress reports that we're not achieving that 95% reliability, and we haven't over the last sort of 4 or 5 months of reporting. We've highlighted that that is unacceptable to the contractor, and they need to put in place a plan to rectify that so that the numbers of machines that are not available is significantly reduced. The numbers of machines and the duration of that unavailability, which affects that overall percentage. So that's an area that we're particularly focusing on, and it's probably one of the ones that creates some of the most significant reputational headaches for us as a service provision, where people want to put their parking meters in and they find that machine is out of action or out of action for an extended period, or the adjacent machines are as well. So that's probably one of our critical service levels we're seeking to address. So since that report, we've again highlighted out the necessity of focusing on that as one of the key measures for us.
Thank you, Madam. Thanks, JP and Madam Chair. I'll just say I'd reinforce if Councillor O'Brien's on the same bandwagon as I am. I think that, Rotorua residents are fed up with the unreliability of these machines and having to walk around the place to make their payment. So I'd encourage you to keep on that piece of work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. I think that draws to an end the questions. Just one other thing that perhaps I can also add is if there are concerns of people that are trespassing or sleeping or begging in the doorways of shops, then a visit or a ring to the community hub can ensure that a police officer can be sent there, because they can be trespassed if they're in a private doorway. And I have actually had feedback from the community hub that that is actually working quite well, where people have been trespassed and moved on from shop doorways. So thank you, councillors. That brings to an end the Community and District Development meeting. Thank you very much for your indulgence. Can I ask Councillor Barker to close this meeting with the karakia, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kia whakaria te tapu, kia wātia ai te ara, kia turuku whakataha ai, kia turuku whakataha ai, haumie, huie, tākia.
Kia ora, Councillor Barker, for the closing karakia. The meeting is now closed, so we will adjourn till 1 p.m. when we'll restart the council meeting. Thank you, councillors.
Recording stopped.